is AQ Stone's parts and replacement parts video, and what I'm about to show you is going to show you some things that you need to be aware of, something that you need to pay attention to as far as parts that you need to replace, parts that you need to be looking for wear and tear, things that give you problems as far as your cutting that's not involved with stencil or involved with major problems. These little bitty things can cause major problems along the way, and especially if you don't take care of the situation kind of immediately. First thing you're looking at now are the two motor head gears. The one on the left is a brand new one. The one on the right is one that has been taken off of an old machine that is worn down completely. If you notice the size and the diameter, you'll notice the teeth, etc. These will cause you problems with your belts being online and your belts doing what they're supposed to do on each side. Each one of these small gears are attached to the motor on each side of the cutter under the panel. They are attached to a small belt that drives the cutter left to right or either front to back. So it's marked X and Y on your machine, so as far as your left and your right, you know which way you're supposed to go for as far as the keypad and stuff goes. This one happens to be the one that's on the non-keypad side. The reason there's a difference, there's a different set of number of teeth on the belts, a different set of number of teeth on the gears. So you have to be aware of what you're looking at and what you're doing with that. But these will cause problems with thick and thin lines. They'll cause problems with circles not connecting back where they're supposed to, that type of thing when you get into that territory. Next, you have the two gears that are basically controlling the long top belt that pulls your motor from side to side. And the left one there is a brand new one. The right one is one that has been used and used and used. You can tell it's got indentions, it's creased, and these products basically are all soft aluminum, so that's where you run into the issues. They will wear down. That's just all there is to it. But this controls your motor head going left and right across the machine. The big belt is attached to both of these on each side. There's also a bracket there that has two bearings. The bearings and things are also something that will wear out over a period of time, but this small little bearing here controls what's going on with that. You have an issue with the bearing itself and then making it turn properly. If you open up your machine and you have parts from a bearing all over the place, you know that one of those are busted and you have to replace those bearings. So it's not a big deal, but it is kind of time consuming according to where it's at. But those are the two main things to look for in that particular area. Next, you have the other larger bearing. This bearing is on the control rods where your belts are. It's larger. It will tend to explode on you quicker than any of the rest of them simply because of the wear and tear that it has to go through. So be on the lookout for that. This bearing right here will basically just disintegrate, and you will see shavings, you'll see parts of the bearing itself, and you can go from there as far as what you need to do to replace it. These three bearings here, these are the bearings that are used for the motor head itself. There are three of these inside of the motor head. Each one is attached to the stainless steel rods going across. These bearings will wear out. They are enclosed, but they still wear out. The lubrication inside tends to dry up, and it will disintegrate. The ball bearings that are in there will get rusty just by humidity, moisture, whatever. And you will start to hear a grinding noise. You will start to hear or see the motor head itself kind of stop in place just a fraction of a second, but it will cause issues. Biggest concern and biggest thing that you use for a trigger is the noise that you will hear, because it gets to where it's almost like a grinding sound. But these bearings do wear out. They have to be replaced every once in a while. It's not something that's replaced quite often, but it is something that has to be replaced. Now, in dealing with the rest of the machine itself, as far as the motor head goes, the good old solenoid switch here, this is the main culprit in a lot of cases in dealing with what goes on and what happens with the cutter itself. The solenoid itself moves up and down. It is attached to the K card with the wire that you see. It has the orange attachment to it that goes to the K card, and that's what it uses for its basic information guide. It can get overheated. It will stop. It will slow down. You can feel it in the machine. You can hear it. As long as you hear that good pop, pop, pop with what you're dealing with when it comes to the solenoid switch going up and down, then you're okay. But if you hear it starting to get light in the noise factor, you see it get slower in the movement up and down, then you have an issue with it. It can get overheated, it can burn itself out, and it does often. So there's lots of different effects that can happen, you know, thick and thin, not cutting through, not getting down to the bottom of the stencil. You know, that's what I'm talking about when I'm not saying not cutting through. So the brass bushing that you see at the bottom of it is also another piece that comes into play when it comes to the solenoid, and it has to be replaced, or the solenoid switch itself has to be replaced, and it's all about process of elimination. The solenoid itself, you can hear it, like I said. The biggest thing with the brass bushing is you can see what goes on with it and what the problem is with it. If you'll notice these two little brass bushings here, the one on the right is a new one, the one on the left is one that's been used quite a bit. It tends to wear down. Again, these are soft metals and they're beating against each other, so therefore it tends to cause the issues because they just wear down. When this brass bushing gets thin like this, the knife blade's not picking up and down like it's supposed to and going to a certain spot, because what you're doing is you're dealing with it going against the plate here, and it goes into that slot there. If it's thinner, it's taking the blade and the blade is dropping. People will notice that they have a stencil that has a drag mark on it. Well, the drag mark is a definite situation to where it tells you we've got an issue with this little brass bushing because it's not thick enough on the ends to pick the blade up as far as what it needs to go. In dealing with the plate itself, that's a new one on the right there. This is an old one on the left, and if you see the indentation on the one on the left, that's where that brass bushing has started to beat the plate and indent the plate to where it will not pick up the knife blade where it's supposed to go. It's not flat on the top side. You can take this plate and flip it over and use the other side, but if the other side has been used before, as you can see this one has, then it's indented on both sides. It can be done. Both sides are the same as far as what they are, but this is something you need to be aware of. It will cause your blade to not pick up enough, and that's when you see the drag marks along with the brass bushing that does the exact same thing and gives you the exact same problem area. Most of the time these two pieces get replaced at the same time. The other thing that you have with the solenoid and that brass bushing is you can tell where that brass bushing is there. You can see threads right there on the rod. Okay, well, those threads are not what you want to see. What you want to be able to see is when you put this on, that is completely up to the top and you don't have any threads showing. Now there's an indent there, but it's not a thread. That brass bushing has to be all the way up, no threads showing, and if it does, once again, you get drag marks, you get thick and thin if you're not careful, but the big issue is the drag marks, and you'll see that, and it's not picking the knife blade up enough to where it needs to go to. Red chain, everybody's familiar with this. This is what wraps around the cutting head and makes it work. This red chain stays intact. It is very difficult to break or bend or anything like that. It has its teeth. These teeth will break over a period of time. This particular piece of equipment here will break apart. The teeth inside in the center will break in most cases, and when it does that, it will not pick up the gear to control the motor head, the knife head, and therefore you get a situation to where it's not turning like it's supposed to, and you get this funny situation to where the knife blade itself won't turn and it drags and just cuts and grinds into the stencil itself, and therefore you don't get a good cut. It will show up immediately and you will notice it. So be aware of this red chain and what it does and how it needs to be used. The other and probably the last thing that you need to deal with is the knife blade itself. And these knife blades are very, very sensitive as far as what they do and what they are. As you can see, the one on the left has that really, really sharp tip. The one on the right is actually broken. You can tell it's broken just by looking at it from the side. It has no very sharp tip. It has that flat spot. That's a very sharp tip on the left, and that's something that you have to look for. When that happens, your blade's not going to cut right, and you're going to be dealing with a situation to where you've got bad stencil that won't pull, it's not cut properly. Your sandblast guys will be complaining, I promise you. So that's something you have to look for. Always make sure that you've got that sharp tip there on that blade. These things are made of tungsten steel, so they're very difficult to break, but you can break them. I have used a blade for 5 years or more, but I've also used one for 6 months or more, because if you cut through or have a jam in your stencil, it can snap one in a heartbeat. So that's something that you have to be aware of. Last couple of pieces I'm dealing with here are for the 0700 cutters. These are your main culprits in dealing with that. This little triangle plate and a little cylindrical, the up and down motion on the 700 gives you that information. If it looks like that, then you've got a situation to where it's not touching the trigger mechanism, which is a switch on the 700 cutter. That will go flat as far as that silver piece, and then you also will have an indentation in the white cog piece that you have there. And what I'm saying by the switch itself, there's a switch that has to go down and touch, and when it goes down and touches this switch right here, this is what you're looking for as far as the switch plate itself. Once it touches this here, it pushes this in, and that's what makes the cutter head go up and down on the old 700 cutters. You have to make sure that these are new, make sure they're not too worn, where you got a good smooth rounded edge to it, and it doesn't look like this. Okay, that's what you're dealing with when you have that problem. It hits up against that switch. Again, it's soft metal, and it hits that switch and just bounces up and down, and therefore you run into that problem. So that's another issue that goes along with that. Basically what these parts and pieces do, they do everything and control what you do with a cutter itself, and these are the different parts and pieces that you need to be aware of. If not, our lovely famous word is wonky jawed, and that's what happens. Everything will go wonky jawed. You get the problem in dealing with different parts and pieces, and everybody complains about all of these parts and pieces, but the biggest issue is it is just like a car. You have to take care of it. You have to make sure that you are dealing with the parts and pieces that you need to be able to make this thing work. Okay. Lastly is just the information that I'm trying to give you is something to help. We do not work for MonuCad, but I have been in business with MonuCad for 30 years. So you're dealing with a situation to where we're trying to help y'all as far as what you need to be aware of, and we hope that these videos are helpful. We hope that we are able to give you some insight on what causes your issues and what causes your problems. Basically, that's about the main parts and pieces without getting into the bigger pieces that are on the machines that are inside the panels, and we'll get to those at another time. But as of for today, that's basically the information that we're going to put out, and you can go from there with it. If you got any more questions, just be sure to send us a message at AQ Stone Design, and we'll get you taken care of. Appreciate it. Thank you. Bye-bye.